Okay, I think we have quite a few people, so we should get started because we have a lot to cover tonight. Welcome everyone to tonight's public meeting, introducing you to the Brookland Public Education Project. My name is Zachary Burt, and I'm the Community Outreach and Grants Manager at the DC Preservation League. For those of you who may be new to DCPL, we are Washington, D.C.'s citywide nonprofit founded in 1971. We're celebrating 55 years this year, and we are dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing the historic built environment of the nation's capital. I have a few things to go over before we get started. First, I'd like to start by taking a moment to acknowledge some of DCPL's top sponsors that you see here on the screen. Their annual financial support helps underwrite free programs like the one tonight. They are the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Douglas Development Corporation, QTAC Rock, Bayer Blinder Bell, EHT Traceries, and KCE Structural Engineers. Thank you all for your dedication to historic preservation in DC. This project started last year in response to a Section 106 Memorandum of Agreement. Section 106 is a federal historic preservation review process that takes place when a federal or federally assisted project has the potential to affect historic properties. In this case, that is the commercial buildings along 12th Street Northeast that you're going to be hearing about more tonight. If you have any questions about the Section 106 process, I'd be happy to chat with you. Just feel free to reach out to me at zach@dcpreservation.org. So tonight's meeting will have two parts. First, Heather McMahon, an architectural historian and this project's consultant, will give a presentation on the project, which intends to provide a comprehensive community history of 12th Street Northeast commercial corridor between Otis and Monroe Streets. Following Heather's presentation, we will open it up to questions and comments, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you all, the community. So please drop in any observations, thoughts, questions, etc., into the Q&A box or the comment box at the bottom of your computer screen, and we will get to those in the second half of the meeting. Now, before I turn over to Heather, I would like to invite Amin, a longtime Brookland resident and community advocate. I know many of you know him, who is also the ANC 5B04 commissioner, to say a few words.
Thank you, Zachary, and good evening, everyone. I want to say thank you and welcome to all of you for attending this evening. And I'm truly deeply moved and encouraged to see so many people in attendance for our project, our program this evening. First, I'd like for you to join me for a land acknowledgement. Acknowledging that, recognizing that the Nacotchtank and the Piscataway people, the first residents on the land that would become the District of Columbia. Thank you. And I'm going to have one more request of you here, or another request of you here, I should say. Please join me in a moment of reflection and silence for the ancestors of Brookland. Thank you. I'm going to call two names of ancestors in particular this evening, Raul Amin Quander and Christine Key Malesky. Raul Amin started this journey with us almost 2 years ago, and I believe that he would be pleased on where we landed this evening on the first installment of this project. For those of you who know or maybe didn't know, Raul Amin was a Brooklander. He was an author, a genealogist, founder of a historical society, a public historian, a board member to the DC History Center, and married to Carmen Quander for over 15 years. On September the 25th, 2024, the Brookland community convened at Brooks Mansion to review a project proposal for the 3500 block of 12th Street, known as historic downtown Brooklyn. Though by the end of the meeting, we did not agree on the project proposal, it was evident that we all agreed that we really cared about the future of Brookland. Shortly after that Brooklyn community meeting, a group of grassroots historians, Brooklyn neighbors, gathered to talk about DC history and community history. They talked about the past and the future of 12th Street. They discussed historical architectural design. They remembered the businesses along U Street. They talked about legacy families and once famous residents of Brooklyn. They shared stories from neighbors of past and present. This group of grassroots historians and neighbors consisted of Caroline Petty, John Feely, Bob Malesky, Raoul Amin Quander, and myself. The group reached out to Zachary Burt, who you just met, and Zachary connected us to Heather McMahon, who you will meet. From this very natural and organic gathering of neighbors, the Brooklyn Public Education Project was conceived. As I think back on it, the Brooklyn Public Education Project is a dedicated love letter to Brookland. And it's also a call to action to all of you who are here this evening, a call to assist in the historic preservation, archival science, oral history of DC, Brooklyn, and its residents. It's also a call for you, for us, to see public history as activism in an aura of redevelopment of Brooklyn. I know it's getting late, and I know that you're awaiting the presentation, so I have one more request of you. I know you've all settled in front of your screens this evening with your libation of choice, so please join me in a toast to Brookland. Give you a second to grab your libation here. Here we go. To Brookland, celebrating 100 years of a great neighborhood and visioning the next 100 years together as a community, Brookland. Now, I want to pass or refer to someone that many of you know and know of his contributions, to the neighborhood. Oh man, I knew this was going to happen. My phone went off. Give me a second. It's my mom checking in on me. And to his contributions to the neighborhood and the city. Robert Bob Malesky. Bob is a true Brooklander, a retired NPR senior producer, local historian, longtime senior producer of a Weekend Edition Sunday, author, and now operates the Bygone Brooklyn local history site. He also serves as the interviewer and moderator for the Our Neighborhood, Our Stories Author Talk series. And that series formed right here in Brooklyn. This award-winning series in partnership with DC Public Library, many Brooklyn organizations like the Village, the Civic Association, and others, and the University of Maryland God Lab. Bob was married to Christine Key Malesky for over 50 years, 55 years. I pass it to you. Bob's a friend, our neighbor, and a mentor to me in the history circles. Bob, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate the mention of my wife as well. I've been a Brookland resident for nearly 60 years now. It's a long time. I've seen a lot of changes I can't say as the neighborhood grew because it was already grown when I got here, but I have seen a variety of changes in a variety of places. And that is partially why I started my blog, to remember what came before us, to remember the people who walked down these sidewalks, who went into these shops, who created this neighborhood, to get a sense of who they were, what they did, and how we evolved into the vibrant neighborhood we have today. And so I'm very happy now to introduce Heather McMahon, the architectural historian who is the main consultant on this project, who has been working on that very thing, checking out those stores and who went there. Heather.
Thank you so much, Bob and Raw and Zach. These are great introductions, and I'm really honored and excited to be with all you Brooklanders tonight, even distantly. Again, my name is Heather McMahon, and I'm an architectural historian consultant. And I'm here tonight to review with you the research that I've undertaken into the history of the businesses along 12th Street Northeast and Brookland, Washington, D.C. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of this research. We mentioned it before, it's part of a Section 106 project, but the Brookland Public Education Project intends to provide a comprehensive community history of a two-block study area along 12th Street commercial corridor between Otis and Monroe Streets. Now, the focus is on commercial properties in the study area and identifying the succession of businesses in those storefronts from the age of when the building was constructed, the age of the building's construction, through the present day. Now, taking into account a few recently demolished buildings, there are 43 addresses or present or extant buildings to research. All right, so how did I identify various businesses that occupied 43 different buildings from time spans that ranged from the 1910s all the way to the present day? Well, first, I relied on the historians who have come before me, such as John Feely and Rosie Dempsey, whose book on Brookland is pictured on the right. I used Bob Malesky's blog, Bygone Brookland, quite a lot. I referenced the work of John N. Pierce, who published an essay on Brookland in Washington at Home, an illustrated history of the neighborhoods in the nation's capital, which is a book edited by Catherine Schneider-Smith. And I used others similar scholarly sources. Then I turned to primary source materials. Newspaper notices, articles, advertisements, and obituaries in historic local newspapers were the most helpful primary resources, followed by city telephone and real estate directories. The Catholic University of America's Cardinal Yearbook collection was also very helpful, as local businesses would buy advertising space every year. Historic maps, and very particularly the Sanborn Company's fire insurance maps and George William Baist's real estate atlases, both of which were updated every few years, were integral to my research, as are historic photographs, if I could come by them. So all of these various sources helped me piece together the puzzle of what businesses occupied each building over successive years, over a century of time span. The deliverables in my contract that I promised to produce were threefold. First, I created an Excel spreadsheet that listed each business on the y-axis, and then 5-year increments on the x-axis. And then I filled that in with all that data that I accumulated from the means and methods that I just described in the last slide. After that, I conducted 3 oral history interviews, and I had 3 additional telephone conversations with longtime Brookland residents and former store owners in order to get insider perspectives on cherished institutions and businesses. Lastly, I created, and I am actually still creating, only the draft has been done. I created or am creating a draft written report that outlines my research in narrative form. All of these materials will coalesce to create the ultimate deliverable, which is an interactive ArcGIS story map that will be published on the internet. The story map will combine audio clips from oral history interviews, images, and then written narrative to provide an engaging history of these 2 commercial blocks on 12th Street. It will be publicly accessible by virtue of having a permanent URL address, and we will provide physical QR codes in places along 12th Street so that pedestrians in the shopping corridor will hopefully see it, and they can pull up the story map on handheld devices. Now, I want to stress here that when my work is done, this project is by no means complete. We see my work as the first of many phases, and if we can acquire additional funding every year, we'd like to especially see the oral history collection piece grow. We also consider this work iterative, and this is why we're presenting our findings to you today for feedback. If you have comments, questions, or corrections, we want to hear them from you at the end of this presentation. And I will also provide you with contact information at the end of my presentation so you can get in touch with us later. Now, let's start this journey. I thought instead of just telling you what businesses occupied what buildings in what years, which feels kind of dry, I'd take you on a very low-tech tour of 12th Street using maps and photographs. And then I have here little silhouettes in the corner in period costume, which will help us remind us what era we're in as we go through our tour. So the 2-block area of 12th Street that we're focusing on is part of that original Brookland subdivision that was created in 1887. A decade later, as you can see in this circa 1896 photograph, that area of 12th Street between Monroe, which is running here in the foreground, and Otis, which we can't really see, but it's back there, was very sparsely developed. What we see in the center of this photo is the Brookland Baptist Church, located on the northeast corner of 12th and Newton Streets. And then to the left here, I don't know if I can get my cursor. You see my cursor. To the left here, we see one Victorian house built, sometime before this photograph was taken, wood frame, on the west side of 12th. And it is the only building in this 2-block area that's actually fronting 12th Street at this point. If we jump to this map that's made about a decade later in 1907, we see within this blue rectangle here the same buildings that we saw in the photograph from a decade earlier. So here we've got, again, my cursor, we've got the church, the Brookland Baptist Church on that northeast corner of Newton and Monroe Streets. We've got that Victorian house that we just saw that is the only building facing 12th. We have a house here that's actually on Monroe and it's straddling 2 residential lots. It's not quite on the corner here. And we've got one new building since 1896. It was built sometime between 1903 and 1907, so we'll just say circa 1905. It's a wooden paired house. It shares a party wall, and we'll have reason to come back and talk about that later. One last thing I want to say about this map before we move on is notice the lot sizes. They're very deep and they're somewhat wide, and they are oriented towards the named streets, Otis, Newton, Monroe, and not the numbered streets. So 12th Street at this point was really not intended to be a commercial street, but just one of many north-south routes running through a residential neighborhood. That was what Brookland was really conceived of. So what changed? I'm sorry, skipped. No, yes, there we go. Sorry, skipped there a minute. Well, in short, the streetcar came through in 1910. That's what changed. It crossed the Monroe Street Bridge, heading east, and then it ran up 12th Street towards Randolph Street before looping around. And suddenly, 12th Street had possibilities other than just a leafy residential suburb. And what we see here in this 1913 map, down in this corner, is that these residential lots were being re-subdivided into narrower, more urban-sized lots with thinner footprints, and they were oriented towards 12th Street. So there was this intention of redeveloping to orient onto 12th Street rather than the named streets at this time. There were commercial possibilities. Now, by 1913, as you see here too, there is only one building that has been built. It was built in 1911, but it acts as a catalyst for the future growth of the street. And that building is this one at 3501 12th Street Northeast, built again, as I said, in 1911. It's the first commercial building built in our 2-block section of 12th Street. And it is the King David Masonic Lodge that was largely developed by the Lord and Sherwood families and other local Masons. Excuse me. The lodge maintained offices for themselves on the 3rd floor, and on this extended grand 2nd floor, which had a stage. This was an events space, so dances, concerts could be held here. But the Masons had always intended the 1st floor to be retail. Actually, from 1912 to 1927, this part was the local Brookland branch of the United States Postal Service. This was the post office. But you can see here, I can't quite read the whole title on the window, but it says something Woodson Company. So there was also retail in the back of this ground floor building, but this was more oriented towards Monroe, this side of it. All right. So as I said, that building acted as a catalyst, albeit a slow one, largely due to World War I, it put a moratorium on construction across the country, but definitely in DC. So things were slow to get started after 1911. But by the end of the decade, 1919, we have three more buildings to the north of this is the Masonic Lodge and Post Office we've got. 305 has been built in 1913. 309 was built not long after that. And by 1919, we've got 3517. So three more buildings going up the street, going north on the east side of the 3500 block. All right. So now we're in the Roaring 20s. And the 3500 block in particular is largely built out. This photograph was taken in 1925, and we can see the post office here on the ground floor of the Masonic Lodge. Now I'm going to use this zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this a little more clearly. Next to the post office, there's no sign on this building, but if you look closely, you can see produce in the window. And I'm going to just tell you now, this is the Brookland Market, and it was run by a man named George C. Hyder. Next to that, also can't really read much more than R.J. Moore Coal Company, but this was actually the Brookland Hardware Store run by Paul F. Moore. Next to that, we've got the Sanitary Grocery Company. Next to that, we've got the A&P Grocery Company. The next two buildings, we can't see the signs, but this one here is a Piggly Wiggly grocery, but it also confusingly either shared space or shared address with Hask's Confectionery, a bakery. Since I don't know what was in this building, I suspect that the Piggly Wiggly address was mistaken in advertisements, perhaps. I don't know. I can't quite tell. But maybe the Piggly Wiggly was actually in this one, and this was Hask's Bakery, because this building at the end, and you can't see it, but the alley runs right through here. This was a bakery for many, many years later, so it makes sense that this was Hask's. And then at the end of the block here, we have a bank. This is the Merchants National Bank by 1927 or 25 when this photograph was taken. It was built in 1922 as the City of Brookland Bank, again by James Sherwood, who had a lot to do with the development of Brookland in this 12th Street corridor. So if I zoom back out, you can kind of see also that there are buildings on the other side of the street, but we can't really get a good view of them. So I'm going to go to this map that was made by the Sanborn Company in 1927. And from this map, we can see what has been built since 1919. If you recall that 1919 map, we only had 4 buildings, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we've had a lot more. So starting from the top left over here, 10 brick row houses were built by the Bliss Construction Company in 1923, and they are numbers 3610 to 3628. This is that semi-attached dwelling and store that was built circa 1905. It has a Newton Street address. It doesn't have a 12th Street address yet. This is this curious thing. It says foundations. Now, a house was built here between 1907 and 1913, so circa 1910. But by 1927, so only like 17 years later, it must have burnt or otherwise been razed to the ground because all that's there at that point are foundations. 3514 is that Victorian house that we saw in that very first photograph. It's a wooden house built sometime before 1896. And then George C. Hyder, the guy who's running the market across the street at Brookland Market right here, built these 6 commercial blocks in 1920. Now going across the street, we have that Masonic Lodge. 3507 and 35 through 3517 are 6 storefronts that were built successively between 1913 and 1927. We've got a bit of a space, a bit of a lag here, and then we've got 3527 is that bank from 1922. Note here that this parcel is blank, and this is where the Brookland Baptist Church was, but it burnt to the ground in 1926, and this lot won't be developed again for another 11 years. All right, moving north, we have 3607, which would later be addressed 3619, and it's a dwelling that was built circa 1925. And then 3609 and 3611, which would also later become 3627 and 3629, is another dwelling, a 2-story semi-attached, it's duplex, but they have built very purposefully at the same time these 1-story storefronts to go in front of their house facing 12th Street. So it was built as a mixed-use residence commercial building. Here are some of the businesses that were occupying these stores in 1927. Again, all of these brand new row houses, which are only 4 years old, were being used at the time as private residences, so they're dwellings. That Newton Street house from about 1905, the dwelling was likely inhabited, but in 1927 there was a note that the store was vacant. However, newspaper clippings show that there was a delicatessen there from about 1928 to 1929. All right, and then on this block here, we've got 3414. That's the house. I'm not positive what was in that house, but Hong Lee Laundry Company advertised in the Cardinal yearbooks, and they were there from 1928. They advertised themselves as being at 3512 12th Street, however, and you can tell from this very map, like the numbers are 3510 and 3514. There is no 3512. So it's a little confusing. They could have been in that. The laundry could have been in that building. The laundry could have been in 3510 because I couldn't find any businesses saying that they were in 3510 in that year. 3508 is the Brookland Shoe Repair run by Sam Kizari. 3506 is the Brookland Barbershop run by Gaetano Guy Valenti. These 2 businesses we're going to see a lot of. They lasted for nearly a century. And 3504 is the Bonton Cleaning and Dyeing Shop. 3502 is the Tootsie Shop, which I just enjoy saying. They sold notions, which I believe are small gifts and presents, like I think a knickknack store. 3500 is Mayo's Pharmacy, but Dr. Redmond Mayo dies of pneumonia at a young age in 1927, and this building becomes the Brookland Pharmacy in 1928 and stays the Brookland Pharmacy for many years. All right, across the street, we still have our post office, and some offices are retail in the back. However, the post office leaves this in November of 1927, the same year, and Brookland Hardware, which is right here in 3509, moves into this building, 3501, and stays almost a century as well. 3507, again, is that Brooklyn Market run by George C. Hyder. 3509, for right now, Brookland Hardware, but again, when he leaves in 1929, it becomes an American Stores grocery. And then we have another line of groceries. We've got Sanitary Grocery, the A&P Grocery, the Piggly Wiggly with Hask's Confectionery, and this unknown, still unclear what was in this space. This is the Merchants Bank. And then up in these 2 houses, sorry, I cannot see my own screen. Carmelo Vici is running a grocery store and residing in this house with his family. And in this one, Lorenzo Bruno, by 1930, is running an iron shop and living with his family here. All right. So, and just because I really enjoy the aesthetics of some of these period advertisements, I thought I would share some of them with you. We've got Mayo's Pharmacy newsletter over here, and they're running a healthy baby contest, which I just find adorable. The Bonton Cleaning and Dyeing Shop, this is an advertisement they put in one of the Cardinal yearbooks, and the same with the Brooklyn Shoe Repair Shop. And then American Stores is one of the many groceries that lined the 3500 block in the 1920s. All right, now we're going to jump ahead a generation or 25 years. It's 1950, the Second World War is over, and 12th Street is entirely built out now. So what you see on this map in this blue rectangle is basically what stands on the ground today, with 4 exceptions that I will discuss a little later. But business is booming on 12th Street because suburban car-oriented shopping centers have yet to replace shopping corridors. And my 2 fashionable silhouetted ladies here are going to walk down 12th Street. So this is a Sanborn map from 1960, but it would have looked the exact same if the company had made their update in 1950. So we're going to pretend this is a 1950 Sanborn. And we can see what buildings have been added to the block since their last mapping in 1927. Again, starting over on the left side, we've got the circa 1905 dwelling that was on the corner here has been demolished, and it's been replaced by the present building, the Art Deco building that's on the corner in 1938. Numbers 3528 and 3532, so 3 different storefronts, have replaced the foundations that were left of that circa 1910 house. And they were built in 1940. We've got 3518 and 20. They're 2 addresses, but they're 1 building. They were subdivided interiorly, but they're actually 1 large building. 3522 and 3524 have all been built in 1929, 1930, and 1937 respectively. And then the house at 3514, that Victorian, has been demolished, and it has been replaced with 1 large structure, 3512 and 3514, that also encapsulated 3510, which had been built earlier. On this side, we've got a couple of buildings down here. 3517 existed, and 3521 was built to its north. And then they were kind of absorbed. A facade unifying the 2 of them together came up around 1940. And after that, the address 3517 ceased to exist. And so this large space is known as 3521. 3523 and 3525 were the leftover undeveloped spaces. They were built out in 1927 and 1936. We've got the Newton Theater, built in 1937 on the old site of the church. The Bruno family who lived in this house have built 2 little twin flanking 1-story commercial buildings in 1937 and then in 1938. And then lastly, this other little 1-story commercial building, 3625, was built in between the Vinci home and the Bruno home in 1937. And here's a list of all of the businesses that you could go and see in 1950 if you were walking on 12th Street. And I'm just going to run through them pretty quickly. Again, most of these row houses in 1950 were being used as private homes, actually about half of them. But the other half were already being used as commercial businesses. 3612 and 14, I don't actually know what was in them in 1950, but they're being advertised for rent or for sale as commercial properties. Then in 3618, the Peck Company had their real estate offices there. And then in 3620, that one was for rent in 1950, but in the next year, 1951, Joann's Beauty Shop moved in. Our brand new Art Deco building, well, it's not brand new, it's about 12 years old now. The MPM Market is in this Art Deco building on the corner. Starting from this block and working our way south, we've got Marfelt's, which was family apparel, Marion's Shingle Shop, which was a beauty salon. And I will just say that Marion moved into this building in 1942, but before then, from the 1920s, late 20s, 29, she'd been in this building. So she just moved across the street. She's been on Brookland for a while. 3528 was the IC shop, which was an ice cream parlor. 3524 was the Economy Electric Service Company. They sold appliances. We've got in 3522 here a High's Dairy. I'm also just jumping ahead a little bit, but Hyde's Dairy by 1963 is going to move over here. So there's a lot of jumping across the street or across the block, a lot of moving into different vacancies. Same businesses, just kind of moving around. Here we go in 3518 and 3520, the Reams 5 and 10 cent store. In the new 3514, we have Rudy's Tavern, but it will become Haps in 1951. In 3512, we have the Brookland Grill, not to be confused with the present day Brookland Grill. 3510 is Sims Radio Store or Company. 3508, again, Brooklyn Shoe Repair. And 3506, Brooklyn Barbershop. And they have been there now for 30 years. 3504 is Horton Jewelers. 3502 is Warner's Men's Shop, Haberdashers. And the 3500 corner lot here is the Leonard Market. Across the street, we still have Brooklyn Hardware, keeping it going. Brookland Market, still Brookland Market, but it's now being run by Kaplan and Cooperman since 1945. In 3509, we have Martin's for Flowers. He will stay there he moves in 1948, so he's relatively new in 1950, but he will stay there for 40 years. Sunset Cleaners, another business that will be there for a long time. Dave Perini's Delicatessen, Baldwin's Bake Shop. The People's Drugstore is what unifies the facade and joins 3521 and 3517 together. Norwood Shops, it seems to be women's apparel. We've got LaMode Cleaners in this building now, and the Hamilton National Bank. Again, we've got the Newton Theater, and then up here we've got Dare King Laundry, Tony's Barbershop, Brooks Radio and Television, an unnamed neighborhood restaurant. That's how it was advertised in the classified ads. The home of Lorenzo Bruno. He actually passes away in 1948, but his family continues to live in 3619. And then 3617 is that little storefront that his family built. It's for rent in 1950, but it's owned by Joseph E. Bruno. And again, I just really think these visuals are amazing. You get a slice of a snapshot of businesses on 12th Street in 1950. We got Sims Radio Company, I mentioned. Norbud is having a sale on ladies' nylons, which I'm sure was very exciting at the time. You got your Economy Electric Service trying to sell you a new fridge. The Louis Bernheimer theaters are celebrating their silver jubilee, and there's a picture down here of the Art Deco, Newton, and the Village Theater, which were both Louis Bernheimer theaters. And then Hamilton Bank. She looks like she's opening a checking account, and she looks like she's excited about it. So, continuing our tour. We're jumping again. It's 1970s. I'm wearing my bell bottoms here. I'm very fashionable. And we are edging into the recent past, or a past that's still well remembered by some Brooklanders today. And luckily for us, a man named Emile A. Press took some excellent photos of 12th Street in 1969 and 1970. So we're going to use his images for the rest of our tour. So I'm going to use, if I can find my cursor again, it keeps disappearing on me. I'm going to use this magnifying glass, and I'm going to just zoom in here to some of these businesses. Okay. Brooklyn Hardware is still on that corner in the old Masonic Lodge building, which they've been occupying since 1929. Next to them, we have the Western Union Telegraph Office. It's a short-lived thing. It's only there from 1970 to about 72 or 73. Next to him, though, we have Martin's for Flowers, the florist that's been there since 1948. He's been on the street now for 22 years, and he'll continue into the 80s. At 3511, we have Sunset Cleaners, which has been in residence since 1938. 3513 is already Murray and Paul's Diner, which opened in that place, in that storefront in 1963. On the other side of the diner is 3515. That's Baldwin's Bake Shop, which Robert Baldwin bought from Hask in 1939. So he bought Hask's Confectionery. So we know that Hask's Confectionery was in that storefront. And then we have that narrow alley. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're still looking at the east side of the 3500 block, but in a different direction. So now we're at Newton, and we're looking southeast. So here on the corner, This is not the bank building that was built in 1922. That bank building was demolished in the 1960s, and this purpose-built High's Dairy Shop was constructed in 1963. Next to that, we've got Tanner's Cleaners. Tanner's opened in the old LaMode Cleaners building in 1968. So in 1970, they're a relatively new business. But again, this has been a Cleaners, dry cleaners, for decades at this point. It's just a different business name. This two-story building is Leonard's School Uniform Service. And then the People's Drugstore are are in the 3525 and the 3517, two buildings that have been unified by this Art Deco storefront. And here we have the Newton Theater. This photo is actually circa 1964, so it's kind of like we've traveled a little bit back in time on our 1970 tour. It closed as a movie theater in 1966, and from circa 1968 to 1973, the Catholic University of America's music department leased the building and put on theatrical and musical performances there. So, to continue our theme, if we're walking down the street, maybe we're just headed to this box office so that we can buy tickets to an operatic concert or a string quartet performance. Okay. Further down the street, this is still the east side of 3600. We've got those twin little storefronts that I mentioned, 1, 2. The close one here, 3617, is occupied in 1970 by Arthur Curling's real estate firm, while the farther one here, I am not positive what was in here in 1970. I know that Henry Berlinski's printing company occupied this space in 1960, so they could have possibly still been here in 1970, but that's one of the gaps I have. The house in the center, 3619, was the Emmaus House from 1968 to 1978. Bob Malesky shared an interesting anecdote about the Emmaus House around this time period, so let's give my voice a minute of rest and listen to a short clip from Bob.
Heather, I'm not sure we can hear it.
Oh, really? Can't hear it?
Let's see.
Okay. So if that wasn't, I'm going to try again if I can turn up the volume. It looks like the volume is turned all the way up, but let me try it again. All right. No, it's actually kind of light on my end too. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I thought it was going to be, again, low tech.
That's why we have the map coming. The map with the audio.
That's what we do have a map. So I was gonna say, so you could have heard Bob talk about the Emmaus House for 2 minutes, and then I was gonna cut it short anyways and say, if you want to hear the rest of it, you have to wait until his whole oral history is available at the DC Public Library's People's Archive, which is our intention with the oral histories that we're collecting and continue to collect. So I'm sorry that you didn't get to hear that. I was so proud of myself for like putting this audio clip in, and it just didn't work. So I apologize for that. All right, so low tech tour. So unfortunately, the house at 3619 and this second building at 3623 were demolished circa 2020, and they have been replaced by a new residential building completed in 2022. But this little building is still there, and it houses a store called Hawke's Bay, if you're familiar with the street. And if we continue, just to finish, we still have our house here on the corner of Otis and 12th, and we have 3 storefronts. You can see from the barber's pole in the center that Tony's Barbershop is still occupying the center store at 3627 in 1970. And then 3625 to the south was a thrifty TV store. And the one 3629 to the north was a DuraClean rugs cleaner shop. So a lot of variations in store options as you're walking up and down the street. Okay, so now we're back at Monroe and 12th, and we're going to walk down the west side of the street. And again, I'm going to use my zoom tool. At least I can do this and zoom in a little bit so we can see some of the signs better. On the corner, we've got the miles-long sandwich shop, followed by Penny Lee's men's apparel store. I will say, however, this photo was taken in 1969. Penny Lee's will close at the end of 1969, and in 1970, 3502 here will house the University Record and Appliance Store for a couple years, and then it will be Psychedelic Haven in 1973, which just sounds like a fun time. 3504 is Horton Jewelers, which opened there in 1934, and it won't close for another 4 years in 1974, so it'll be there for 4 decades. Note that the Brookland Barbershop and the Brookland Shoe Repair in 3506 and 3508, they have been here since 1920 and 1922, and they are going strong. 50 years. It's impressive. Next to that, this curve sign, it's hard to read, but it says Sims Radio Company. So they remain in the storefront from 1938 through 1983. On the other side, you can't see the sign for the tree, but we've got Fred's Inn, which is a neighborhood bar that opened in 1961, and it will stay open until 1977. Stanley's Five and Dime store replaced the Reams Five and Dime store, and it would remain a mainstay on 12th Street through 1986. Now, in this little building that says sandwiches and has a Pepsi logo, it's a sandwich shop of some sort. I don't know the name of it. But in 1970, it becomes a quality plastic slipcover store. And this building right here, this one that's the sandwich shop, is basically demolished or heavily encapsulated by a 4-story residential building that now stands in its place. The black and yellow triangular sign is for Dickey's Cleaners, which occupied 3524 from 1955 to 1973. We can't really see the last 3 buildings very well, but in 1970, 3528 was a Unitax Systems office offering tax preparation services. 3530 was still Marion Shingle Shop, that beauty salon that had been there since 1942. And they would remain open for another 4 years after this tour, so closing in 1974. And 3532 was the Horizon Bookshop until November of 1969, and then it was very briefly from April to December of 1970, just a matter of months, it was the Monkey Shop, a men's clothing store. Got to zoom out and then go to the next one. All right, so continuing down the west side of the 3600 block between Newton and Otis Streets, we've got the MPM Market, which opened in this building in 1948 and would stay open here until 1932. I'm going to use my zoom tool again to go down into these row houses. Excuse me, 3610, it has a sign that says laundry, suggesting it's being used as a business location. By 1970, however, this will become the 3610 Shop, a clothing boutique opened and operated by William and Velma Johnson through 2014, a business that lasted 44 years. The Johnsons also bought the next few row houses down in the 1970s and 80s, and most of these row houses by this point are being used as offices or businesses. 3612 here was an architect's office, just as it still is today. You can see this hanging sign. It looks like it's projecting from 3616. It's a little confusing because I know Mike's Carryout from advertisements in the newspaper was located in 3614, and I am unsure of what was located in 3616 in 1970. So it could be that 3616 was Mike's Carryout. 3618, which is one of the 2 permastone fronted buildings here, was Joanne's Beauty Salon from 1955 to 1969, and then it became William C. Beverly's House of Hair, which opened on August 1st, 1973, and it still remains operating under that name today. So that's 50 years, more than 50 years. 3620 was the Center for Applied Research and the Apostolate, which was associated with Catholic University's Sociology Department. 3622 housed the offices of TPS Publications, whose major journal was The Pope Speaks magazine. 3624 and 3626 were still being used as private residences in 1970, but that last row house, which we can't really distinguish here, 3628 was the headquarters of the Plumbers Local Union Number 5 from 1955, and it would remain that office or headquarters through 1999. Oh, gotta zoom out and then go. Okay, so here we have a few advertisements from some of the businesses I just mentioned. This is a photo of the proprietors of Fred's Inn. They used that as their advertisement in a 1966 issue of the Cardinal Yearbook. Martin's Flowers, again, going strong until the 80s. This is an advertisement from the Post in the 80s, in 1980. The 3610 shop celebrates its 10th anniversary in April of 1980. And Mr. Beverly invites you to his grand opening on August 1st, 1973. And again, we know that the Plumbers Local Union was located in that corner row house. Okay. So unfortunately, I don't have silhouettes in period appropriate costume, nor do I have more than just 2 photos of the street from 1990. Weirdly, it's actually harder to get photos from the recent past than you would think. And they're both of the 3500 block, so I don't have photos of the 3600 block. But this time we will start on the west side of the street. Outside of the frame of this photograph, the corner building at 3500 was occupied by Monroe Deli. Jumping Jack Shoes in 3502. I don't think it lasted too long since Wings to Go Pizza, which is the predecessor of the present Wingland Pizza, was in that storefront by 1994. That Subway has been in the old Horton Jewelers location since 1988. It's been there for a while. Notice that the Brookland Barber and the Brookland Shoe Repair are still viable businesses. They do not close until 2019 and 2018 respectively, after nearly a full century in business. The Classic Framing Shop in 3510 would close at the end of this year, 1990, and it'll be replaced by a retail store called Shades of Indigo from 1991 through 1996. And then lastly, after Fred's Inn closed in 1977, 3512 and 3514 become Kitty O'Shea's restaurant from 1983 to 1996. The remainder of the block is outside of view, but 3518 and 3520, what had been Stanley's Five and Dime, so 2 addresses but 1 storefront really, briefly became a racket and jog sports store in the very late 80s through the very early 90s, about 3 or 4 years. And I found a Washington Times article from August 3rd, 1990, that recounts that, quote, Mayor Barry created a stir in Brookland last evening as a crowd gathered outside the Racket and Jog athletic store in the 3500 block of 12th Street Northeast, where he tried on jogging suits. He left without making a purchase, end quote. By 1990, 3524 had started a long career of successive pizza places, while 3528 was a photography studio. Now back on the east side of the 3500 block in 1990, looking southeast, the former High's Dairy here had become Joe's Mini Supermarket or Mini Mart, and the 12th Street Cleaners had replaced Tanner's Cleaners in 1983, and it is still operating today. And again, series of cleaners, so LaMode Cleaners, Tanner's Cleaners, 12th Street Cleaners. And that makes some sense because buildings are kind of built with ideas in mind, or businesses are bought with all their equipment already in place. So the fact that successive businesses doing the same industry stay in the same building does make some sense. Town and Beauty Barber Supply operated in 3525 here from the late 1980s through the mid 1990s. Now I'm going to zoom in again here so we can see this. The People's Drugstore had moved to the Old Newton Theater by 1989. And in this photo from 1990, it looks like the storefront is vacant. But by 1993, 3520 will be occupied by Deaf Reach, an organization that stays there for about a decade. I am not positive what occupied 3515 here. And I tried very hard to read this sign, and it looks like it says Lucromat, Lucromat. So if anyone attending this webinar knows what the sign says or what business was there in 1990, please feel free to use the chat feature at the end of this presentation because I would love to know. I'd love to know what was in it. We still have Murray. It's hard to see the sign, but this is Murray's and Paul's restaurant, still serving breakfasts. Sunset Cleaners, they're calling themselves Sunset Tailors, but it's the same business. They've been there since the 30s, and they would remain open here for another 4 years, so they'll close in 1994. The Brookland florist replaced Martin's for Flowers from 1986 to 1998, but it's nice to think there was a florist on that block for half a century, if not the same exact ones. Two different bookstores occupied 3507 in the late 80s through the 90s. The first was Bread and Roses and then Book Market. And lastly, Brooklyn Hardware remained open in 3501 12th Street in that flagship building on the corner until Howard Pulitzer retired in 2015. Today, Brookland's 12th Street commercial corridor between Monroe and Otis Streets looks much the same as it did a century ago. Although there are currently vacant storefronts, there have always been vacancies during the 100 years of business occupation on these two blocks. But 12th Street has weathered world wars, recessions, depressions, and even the existential threat of suburban shopping malls. It continues to host legacy businesses that have been open for decades, a few of which we've highlighted tonight. It has lost a few older buildings too. 3522 is now a 4-story mixed-use building with ground floor commercial space that is currently vacant. The Emmaus House at 3619 and the Little Store at 3623 were replaced by a 5-story residential block, multifamily. And across the street, 2 row houses in that row of 10, numbers 3614 and 3616, were replaced by a 4-story multifamily residential building. And these 3 redevelopment projects happened between 2018 and 2022. And they suggest that 12th Street future will include more and denser housing. Streets change, but they also stay the same, as this project has illustrated, hopefully. And at least this project starts to document the history of 12th Street's long and varied history to date. So thank you for taking that tour with me. Thank you for attending this presentation. If you have questions about the project or the Section 106 process, please contact Zachary Burt at the DC Preservation League. His work telephone and email are on the slide. If you have questions about the research, or if you would like to contribute information to make this project fuller, please contact me. I have set up this Google phone number. It's listed on the slide. So if you feel so inclined, you can call, provide your name, and just share a story about a business. Or you can tell me I'm wrong. You can correct me. Please do it nicely, though. These recorded messages can be considered like little mini oral history bites, and they could be used if you grant permission in the final ArcGIS story map that we're putting together. So again, it's a way to solicit a little bit more feedback, but there's many ways. And we have time now for your questions and your feedback too. So I'm going to turn this over back to Zach, who's going to moderate the question and answer session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Heather. That was fascinating and a lot of great images and map images. Quick question though, before we go into the panel, and this will kind of get into, soliciting information for the project. Can you just give the audience a little bit more information about, images from the recent past and why that's a challenge? And then also if people have photos they want to submit for the project?
Thank you, Zach. I actually completely forgot that I had wanted to say that. So thank you. Yes. So, it's a strange thing. I think people like Emil A. Press, who, if that is not a name that you're familiar with, if you go to the DC History Center or Kiplinger Library's online catalog and see all the images, there were certain people, last names like Weimer or John Harry Shannon, who was the Rambler, or Emil, these were godsends. These people were godsends to historians, and they just, Carolyn Highsmith, I guess, is actually someone who's doing this in my lifetime, but they would go out and just record buildings and just take photos of buildings in certain increments, and it's wonderful, and it helps people like me out. And I'm not positive that force is still in action. It's just a lot harder to track down photographs from, let's say, the 1990s, definitely from the 2000s forward. So if any of you attending this webinar have photos that you would like to share from the 1990s forward, again, please contact us. If you would give us the permission to reproduce them in the ArcGIS map that we're making. It's just, again, we're just trying to create a really comprehensive history that's visually exciting. So the more photos and images we have, the better. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I know some questions and comments are going to come in, but Rob, Bob, if you guys have anything to add, I definitely want to give you a chance.
No, nothing now. Just interested to see what the rest of it could be. I think someone knows what that building is. I think someone told me a couple of years ago, and that someone would be Laura, but I don't want to put her on the spot.
Yeah, Laura says a laundromat.
Yes.
It's a laundromat. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Was it called Lucramat, or am I just reading that? It probably says laundromat and I just can't read it correctly. But thanks. Okay. I'm glad to know it's a laundromat. I will make that change.
Yeah, and someone else just added that the something mat, that's what they're calling it, I guess, was a laundromat when I moved here in 2000. So there's that recent
Okay.
past we like to hear about. So I made
Yes.
that in 1990.
Great.
Okay.
Great. That's actually very helpful. Yeah.
Yes. So now we have a
Yeah.
question. Are any buildings on 12th Street designated for historic preservation? Great question. Heather, do you want to answer that, or I can answer that?
Zach, I'll let you answer this one. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so the Newton Theater is a designated landmark, and then the Masonic Temple is a pending landmark. So it's protected like a landmark, but it's not officially a landmark until it goes through the historic preservation review process. It's been pending for some time, so hopefully we will see some action on that in the near future. So long story short, there's only really technically one landmark. Okay, how do socio-demographic population changes overlap with these building businesses changes? Another good question.
I'm happy to take it. Bob, do you have anything you want to share? I mean, I don't want to be the only person who answers these questions, so I'll let Bob have a chance if he wants to say anything about this first.
Well, that's kind of a tricky one. Socioeconomic changes, was it?
Yeah, they put socio-demographic. But yeah, keep going.
Well, you can see certainly some changes over the years in the smaller storefronts. But the major things, grocery stores, a bakery, hardware store, that any neighborhood relied on were the most permanent. And, yes, they may have changed hands a number of times, but it always retained that permanent kind of feel. So that's really all I can say about that. Yes, demographic changes have been enormous, especially in the 50s and 60s when the neighborhood essentially turned from majority white to majority African American. Did that really change the storefronts? Or what was in the stores? I don't think so. Everyone relied on the same kind of businesses. So I don't think that the demographic changes had a huge effect on the 12th Street corridor. I just don't.
Bob,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, Heather, but my question to Bob is, Bob, did the Newton Street Theater, which is now the CVS, didn't that have somewhat of a change, especially in ownership? I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah, after Catholic University, as you heard, leased it for the music department, a local group here got together and wanted to reopen it as a theater, as a movie theater for the community. They managed to, get enough money to repair the interior enough, and I think this was 1970, maybe 71, maybe 69 even. But and I even went there. I needed to see a movie inside the Newton Theater after all those years. But they could not manage to keep it running for, I think it was just a year. And it required too many volunteers. And things had changed. You weren't bringing in a lot of patrons to old movies anymore. So that's when um, Peoples moved there first, and then that became the CVS.
Yeah, and that was a group of Black businessmen and Black business organizers in the city and in the area at the time.
I believe so, yes.
Yes.
So I just wanted to follow up on that socioeconomic or demographic question. Yeah, I have not in my own research because I've been so focused on identifying the businesses that were in these spaces. And sometimes that meant identifying the owners of these businesses, but not always. I was not always able to. So I can't say with any um veracity. I can't say when the very first African American owned business joined 12th Street. But by the 1970s, you've got at least on that 3600 block that we went down, William and Velma Johnson open up the 3610 boutique. And then two doors down, William C. Beverly opens up Beverly's House of Hair. These are two businesses that lasted a very long time, and they figure in a few of the oral history conversations that I've had. And so I think you're starting to see that shift in ownership by, the late 60s, early 70s. For me, I think you see a little bit more interestingly a changing trend in people's buying habits, right? Like what struck me, and again, I haven't really analyzed this fully, but what struck me about the 1920s is how many grocery stores are on one block. Like, I think by our standards, an absurd amount of grocery stores on one block, but that was apparently how people in the 1920s lived. And even if Brookland was semi-rural and very close to undeveloped outskirts that had farms, food attainment seemed to be the primary drivers, the economic drivers in the 1920s. Then by the 1950s, you see a lot more apparel, like clothing stores, than I think are on 12th Street today. But you always had hardware stores. You always had a drugstore, and the CVS is the drugstore that's there now. There's always been offices, real estate, tax prep. So some of the same services have always been there. Hair salons have always been there. We've got Patrick's Pet Care there now, and there was an animal veterinary hospital there for a while. So I feel like there are kind of these larger macro trends, from where we buy our food to where we buy our clothes to where we have our services performed for us. That seems to be the way that this general business trend goes over the long durée, the long arc.
Yeah, and just one more question or comment, I guess, on the population and demographics. Do you guys have any idea of just the general trend of the population? Like what was the population of Brookland in 1920, maybe versus 1950 versus now? Has it been somewhat stable over the past 30, 40 years? Any insight on population?
So sadly, I did not delve into those numbers. I mean, and I'm gonna let Bob take this in a second from me, but again, I feel like I'm very unprepared to answer this question, and I apologize for being so unprepared. But what I'm gonna say is that Brookland was highly residential from that, first quarter of the 20th century. And per the maps that I was showing you, still sparsely built out and didn't really build out, I think, until about World War II. So I would say the population was on the lower side for the first quarter of the 20th century, right? I think you probably hit peak max around the middle of the century. And I think having a conversation, there was basically white flight to the suburbs and general flight to the suburbs in the latter half of the 20th century that may have caused a population dip. I'm not positive about that. And I'm assuming that Brookland's population now is pretty stable. But Bob, you've been there for 60 years. Please let me know about your perceptions about population change.
Yeah, and in general, I think there have been some little dips over the years, and returning, but it's been a general incline, and it has been pretty steady all in all. Yeah, the major demographic shift took place primarily early 1950s, and then when Brown v. Board of Education integrated the schools, white flight hit Brookland particularly hard. I mean, an awful lot of people left, but an awful lot of new people came in, people of color especially, and that's how the demographics shifted, so quickly. But that may have been a slight dip in overall population numbers at that time, but it grew right back very quickly. So, yeah, I think it's been relatively steady all along.
Right. Yeah, and just one last comment someone had is they just said it would be interesting to overlap your story map with racial ethnic changes. And I think, as Heather said at the beginning, or Ra, or someone said it, that this project, I mean, the cool thing about it is we can go in a lot of different directions, just having this foundation of research and documentation. And then I can already see how connections can be made to other projects that have been done here in the city, like the mapping segregation in Washington
Segregation,
project.
yes.
I mean, I can totally see an overlap there. Okay, so switching gears, were Newton Market and Newton Theater designed by the same architects? They seem to mirror each other.
Yes. So I do know that the theater was designed by a very well-known theater designer named John Zinke, Zinke. I have looked at the building permit for the old NPM Market, the Newton Market across the street, and it is not a John Zinke design. I imagine whatever architect did design that, though, was riffing off of the Newton Theater. And plus, these styles were just very popular. It is sometimes hard to see under the signage, but a lot of the commercial storefronts on 12th Street, like the old People's Drug Store, which is now the dental office, that is a beautiful Art Deco storefront. And the 12th Street Cleaners is a beautiful Art Deco storefront. And Hawke's Bay is a lovely little tiny Art Deco storefront. So that's just because a lot of these buildings were built intensely between 1920 and 1940. Those 20 years is when that street really filled out. And Art Deco and Streamline Moderne, which is really what those two, the Newton Theater and the Newton Food Market are, were just really hot, popular styles. So it makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and that architect, just for everyone's background, he also designed the Uptown in Cleveland Park and the MacArthur over in Palisades. So, this is kind of a funny comment. Someone says, looks like that subway has made it 36 years, question mark. That almost makes it historic. It seems like that picture from 1990 showed an effort at cohesive branding for the shops.
Yes.
Curious if there was some government program behind it. Heather, do you want to just go back to that image just so we can all look at
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, let me go back. Yeah, I noticed that too. So I'm going to say something, and I have no idea. I think we might have members of the HPO in our audience today, and if they can chime in about sign compliance, that'd be great. But I have worked in other localities that have design review, and they have sign compliance, and one way to keep a street looking nice is to have these really similar uniform looking signs. And so I was curious myself whether there was a sort of design review happening on 12th Street at that time. I think Anne Brockett has raised her hand.
Yeah, Anne, if you want to put a comment in, we don't have an audio function on here, but if you want to put a comment into the box, that would be great. And it's definitely not an owner who is pushing for the same signage, Heather.
I mean, it could be. I mean, sometimes, again, in my very not DC oriented, a different locality experience of being in design review, it could be that the district that has been created has the design review placed upon it, and it could be that the owner of multiple buildings or a shopping center himself has placed that actually does happen, where the owner wants a uniform appearance. And so when his tenants come in and he's leasing these spaces continually, he doesn't have to worry about them putting up signs that he thinks will detract. So sometimes the owners of these multi storefront properties will put their own guidelines, side guidelines. So it could be.
Right. Okay.
While Zachary is searching for questions, Heather, is there any evidence that the businesses along 12th Street ever formed like a commerce or like a, I don't want to say like a union, but a group to make sure that things like consistency and signs and,
Hmm.
the block stay, uniform and acceptable to all businesses on the block?
That is a great question, and I feel like I'm just failing you all miserably because I have not researched, I've not looked into that, and I've not run anything across my research that would suggest that. I think these especially because a lot of them, so for instance, Marfelt's, which was a family, it called himself a family apparel store in the 1950s, was run by a couple that lived in Brookland. That's one off the top of my head. Marion, I think her husband ran a construction company, the Cord, CORD construction company, and they lived in Brooklyn. A lot of these businesses were individually like just mom and pop shops, like local entrepreneurs, and they were local. So I have to assume that there were business associations, either informal or formal, throughout the span of time. That these people knew each other, they were merchants on the street together, they probably had conversations like these. But I have not run across any documentation that suggests that there was any sort of unified effort to keep the streets looking, any certain way at any certain time. Just because I do think this is kind of funny though. I did run across a number of baseball teams in the 1920s that were fostered by every single store. So, like Marion's Shingle Shop had a baseball team, and it would play the Brooklyn Barbershop baseball team on a Saturday afternoon. And this was like published in the newspapers continuously through the 20s. So every single one of these stores basically fielded their own. How many people are on a baseball team? 12? Like 12 people on a. So I thought that was great. So there's a lot of like civic, extracurricular, extra business stuff happening that I do find in the newspapers, but not exactly your answer to your question, Ra. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have back to the sign comment. So
Mhm.
Anne Brockett at the DC Historic Preservation Office, she confirmed that Brookland is not historic. As I mentioned, Newton Theater is the only designated property along 12th Street. And so she said there would be no design review and this would include signs. So just to put that out there. And then someone else has a very interesting observation. They said the sign conformity happened across Michigan near Turkey Thicket in that string of stores by the now pet repair store. The old appliance repair store held out and was the only one. Sadly, he closed. And Turkey Thicket, what street is that? I know that's by the old Brookland bowling alley.
Yeah, right by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10th in Michigan.
10th, okay.
Yeah, 10th in Michigan down in that way.
Okay, and then someone else asked, do we have any photos of the Newton Theater's original interior? I went to a movie at the Newton in the mid-70s, put on by either Catholic University or some community project, and remember it being gutted and interior finishes being dumpstered probably in 1978, which is sad.
No, I have looked, and I have never found a photo of the interior during its initial opening. Yeah, I also went to a movie there in the 70s, and yeah, the interior was just gutted. I think they had folding chairs, lined up for the viewers at that point. So, but no, I've never found a photo of the interior, its original interior.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Someone commented, in researching our report on the future of 12th Street for BNCA, we heard there was a 12th Street Business Association, but it had gone defunct many years ago. Do you guys have any insight on the business association?
I know there was one, but I knew nothing about it then. I know nothing about it now, so I really can't tell you anything.
Yeah. So Heather, I have another question for you. What makes researching commercial businesses more challenging, easier, whatever word you want to use, than more traditional research, say if you were researching a historic church or a historic schoolhouse or something like that? Has there been anything in particular that's sort of stood out to you on this project?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Researching commercial businesses is hard because they change frequently. And I think we all just know that as a fact of life, that there are some storefronts that hold on to the same business for decades, and then there are some where the turnover is just, it feels like it's every few years. And so I was really challenged about how I was going to go about this because also people don't, stores aren't institutions and they're not libraries and churches and they're not these monuments. They feel so quotidian and everyday. They're like our houses. We don't think about them as these special spaces, even though we use them every day. And they become part of our atmosphere and part of our lived experience every day. But because of that, there aren't like monographs being written on the commercial businesses. There aren't, people aren't scholarly writing about the businesses. They might be writing about the architecture, and they have been. And they might say there's this business in here at this time and this time, but nobody's, undertaking a sort of scholarly examination of business cycles through a particular street. I mean, it'd be interesting if they did. It'd be really challenging. So for me, I really did have to rely on this primary source material to piece together a puzzle that still has gaps in it. Like there are still businesses, as you heard me say, that there are years I don't know what was in there, if anything at all. It could have been vacant. And you're really relying on classified ads, people looking for a waitress for the unnamed neighborhood restaurant, or an actual display ad like Martin's for Flowers, something like that. So it was a very different type of research for me. It was I just use different materials than I typically do.
Yeah.
But thanks for asking. Yeah.
Yeah, great answer. And
So
then, oh yeah, Ross, sorry.
Exactly. I have a question for Heather. Heather, when did we start to notice that the business owners no longer lived in the neighborhood?
Oh, well, so now that's, you keep throwing me these curveballs. That's a great question. I would really have to dig further into the owners, which I have not been able to do. Like the time that I have has been focused on identifying the businesses. So there are tons of owners of these businesses that I still don't know. And I would then need to find out, looking at census data, where they lived at what time, where they live now. If the general sense is that today a lot of the business owners are not local or they're not hyper local. Maybe they live not in Brookland, but they live in DC in adjacent neighborhoods or something. Um, I do get the sense that that was not really the case in the first half of the 20th century, right? Like the Bruno family, they are running an iron shop out of their house, and the Vincis are running a grocery store out of their house. And I'm assuming Sam Kizzari of the shoe repair probably lived locally, and Guy Gaetano Valente probably lived locally. I don't know this for a fact, but I do get a picture of a lot of people living more locally in the early part of the 20th century. And I don't know, whether I can say that has definitely changed or when that changed.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, good question. And someone wanted to just say, Heather, amazing work. I agree. And this also gets into sort of my question too. They were just wondering about the sources. And if you were able to talk to Catholic University for any of those primary sources.
So what I did, because I have not had the opportunity, and I just want to say that we've done this project. What we've done inside of, what is it, April? We've done inside of 4 months. We started this in December. So we've done a lot in a short amount of time. And I do not live in DC, and I have not been able to use the physical repositories that I would like to use. So I have done all of my research remotely, and I have really relied on what's available through the Library of Congress, what's available through the DC Public Library, because I do have a DC Public Library card, and I get to use ProQuest and all these amazing databases because of that. The DC History Center photographic collection, as I've already stated, has been amazing. I used the Cardinal yearbooks because Catholic University put all of them online and made them free and accessible to the public through JSTOR. So my research, sadly, to date, again, inside of 4 months, has been limited geographically by my not being present in DC to remote research. But there is a world of information out there remotely if you know where to look. So yeah, JSTOR, Library of Congress, DC History Center, DC Public Library, and all the databases that are available through them. I think those are primarily what I've used.
Yeah, it's amazing what is being digitized, and every year there's just more and more stuff that's being added from archives and libraries and so on. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think this is a great last question. Oh,
Yeah, I guess my question is to your team, Zachary, and to Heather. What advice would you now give us as a community so we can fill in gaps, continue the story, and move the project forward, or continue the project?
yeah.
Yeah.
Heather, do you want to say
That's
something, and then or I can go?
Yeah, I'll just say something quick and then I'll turn
Yeah.
to you. That's great. We love it. We would love to hear you guys carry the ball forward and continue the story. Images. Again, if you've got any photographs that show these buildings in any era, we would love to see them. Oral histories. If you have a story that you want to contribute, even if it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and it's just like, hey, I bought shoes here and the guy was nice to me, that's great too. Like, it might be something that we can fold into that ArcGIS story map. I do have a spreadsheet. We have not discussed as a team how to make the spreadsheet widely available, but there are gaps. And so we could confer as a team how we can make the spreadsheet publicly accessible that you guys may be able to help fill in those gaps that I still have from research. Those would be my three thoughts. Zach, what are yours?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too that I think it's important to just continue the conversation. And sometimes I find that projects maybe will die down a little bit just because people feel like there's no update or nothing to talk about in particular. And then you don't meet for 3 months, and then you don't meet for 6 months, and then pretty soon everyone's moved on with their life. So I think it's important to touch base, continue conversations, even when it feels like there's not necessarily any new developments on a project. And as we've all talked about before, I mean, there's a lot of great grant opportunities out there that I think could fund this work to continue, to have, another consultant work on it and, dig more into the demographic changes in Brookland, right? Or a graduate student doing a thesis. There's so much work. I mean, there's so much content in Brookland that a graduate student could write a thesis on for either preservation or planning or public history or whatever it may be. So I think really it's just important to keep talking, really, even though I know that sounds like a really simple answer. And I want to give everyone an opportunity to say a final thought tonight. But Heather, before we do that, can you just go back to the slide with your email? Okay, great.
Yep.
And then this
Yep.
is, I think, a great final question for everyone. So what's next for the project? So Heather, why don't you just sort of tell us big picture what's coming up, and before you wrap up your work with this?
Yes. Okay. So again, I am just this foundational first prong, first step, first wave of this, what we would like to see become a multi-year, multi-phase project that grows. And I have completed for the most part, I would say 90% complete. This Excel spreadsheet still has some gaps that could be filled in. I have conducted a couple oral histories. We would love to grow more. If not with me, then as the project keeps moving forward with other people. I have drafted the report that is going to be the foundation for the creation of this ArcGIS story map that I keep talking about. That draft report is in review. It will be reviewed by the stakeholders, my clients, and returned to me for revisions. And it has to be done by the end of June in order to meet the memorandum of agreement that was signed, which is the Section 106 process that Zach referred to in the very beginning of the slide. So my part in this is very particular and specific, and it has a very short timeline, and it will be done soon. By June, we should have that ArcGIS story map in its infant stages. Again, I really think of that product as being something that can be added onto and can grow over time, just because when we first publish it, it doesn't have to be it. It's not like printing out a document and that's the end of it. Like the beauty of a digital project, like a story map, is it can be revised continually and it can grow continually. So yeah, so the real next big phases are finishing up this report and then really getting that ArcGIS story map off the ground.
Yeah, and as I mentioned to Rod, Bob, and other people within the community, hoping to have more presentations like this, not necessarily just with Heather, but with me as well, in person, virtual, have more of these conversations, get more feedback on the project, because as Heather just mentioned, that goes far beyond the Section 106 terms of this June, and we can continue to build on the great work that Heather has done. And I also just want to emphasize, because we didn't talk about it a whole lot tonight, but the oral histories are really critical to all of this history. And as Heather was mentioning, commercial history is sometimes hard to document or find information on. And so that's where the oral histories come in. So if you feel like you can speak to some of the history that's been talked about here tonight, or you're thinking, oh, I know so-and-so, they would be awesome for this, please reach out to us. Just keep in mind that an oral history, it will eventually be in some kind of archival setting, so it will be around forever. So sometimes that scares people away. So that's just something to keep in mind as you have those conversations with someone who might be interested. Okay, Ra and Bob, give us some final thoughts for the evening.
Bob, I'm gonna ask you to go first.
Okay. I have to say, I really enjoyed the tour. Seeing various storefronts at various times brought back memories I haven't had in a long time. It was nice. It was the old community that, I remember from so long ago. And I hope other people had the same feeling and remember and want to set down some of those memories. The oral histories are going to be very important, I think, for any future researchers or anything. And so I want to encourage everyone to participate.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, and I want to add to that what we want from you, our neighbors, our community, the village, the civic center, the Guard Lab, the Ward 5 Leadership Council, schools, garden club, all the committees out there. We want your ideas how we continue to tell the stories of this community. And so we kick this off so it becomes like not only a year-long celebration, but a celebration that just goes on and on. So your ideas for panel discussions, workshops, topics, oral history, narrators for oral histories, all of that stuff, stories. We want to, tell stories about this, oral history slams, story times, and all those things like that. So your organization, we don't have to sponsor that, but we will work closely with you, like Zach said, to help you sponsor it. So if the village, the civic association, the garden club, any other schools, any other clubs out there that have ideas, and reach out to us, and we're going to work with you to help you put together the type of programming that you want, and then get those programmings preserved and archived for the future of DC.
Awesome. Thank you, Rod. That was great. And thank you, Bob. Thank you, Heather. This webinar has been recorded. and we will upload it to YouTube in the next couple of days. So we will share that with everyone who registered tonight. And then if you know other people within the Brookland community that might be interested in tonight's content, feel free to share the YouTube link with them. So with that said, thank you again, you guys. Heather, that was an awesome presentation. I learned a lot, as always, and have a good night.
Yeah, and thank you, Heather, Zachary, and team. It was great working with you folks. I mean, we've been working on this for quite some time now, and I feel like we're going to continue to work together on this.
Absolutely.
I'm very excited about that. But yeah, it's been going on for, like Zachary said, over a year, right? Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, and to continue for many years into the future.
Yes.
You go.
Thanks, you guys. Have a good evening.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Y'all have a good night.
Good evening,
night.
everyone. Good.